You've all seen the mine, too. I added. And he did sound boastful. That's the swamp at the far end of the waterway. Nobody at all goes there. It's full of quicksand and fog. Except us. And nobody goes to the mountains of mist either. But we did once. To the foot of them, anyway. As far as one knows. They remembered. Brushing out his mustache and nothing singular. Rat thought he was hiding a smile when he saw this staring was found. It's much to enter the mountains, Matt said, as if he had to defend himself and not going further. Everybody knows that. That's just foolishness, Captain Coffin, said Gwen cutting angrily. Chinese says... He broke off the cheek running thing, and the look he gave to Tom Maryland was not as friendly as it had been. It is not right to make... It isn't... Her face went redder, and she felt fine. Matt blinked, as if he was just getting a suspicion of what had been going on. You're right, child, the demon said contentedly. I apologize humbly. I am here for the case. My tongue has always gotten me into trouble. Maybe we haven't traveled as far as you, Karen said flatly. What does that tall Ramsey have to do with anything? Just this, lad. A little later I will let you try to...
Hey, Fire, how you doing? Trying it this way, see how it does. Just gotta keep eye on the chat for all the haters out there.
I think I can lift you right now. So when he stepped forward, Tom Maryland motioned him back. Bigger back, bigger. But there are more folks to watch. An artist needs an artist. A score of folks gathered on the green since the demon appeared from the inn. Young men and women sounded silver as they speak, wide-eyed and silent from behind the older onlookers. All looked as if they were miraculous things in the demon.
Got a couple rolled up already.
Then gave a slight shake of his head and sighed. I suppose I better give you a small sample. So you can run and tell the others, eh? Just a taste of what you'll see tomorrow at your festival. He took a step back and suddenly leaped into the air, twisting and somersaulting to land safely men atop the old stone foundation. More than that, 3 balls, red, white, and black, began dancing between his hands even as he landed. A soft sound came from the watchers, half astonishment, half satisfaction. Even Rand forgot his irritation. He flashed his money in his ring and got a delighted one in return. Then both turned to stare unabashedly at the gleaner. You want stories? Tom Maryland declared. I have stories and I'll give them to you. I'll make them come alive before your eyes. Some blue balls joined the others from somewhere, then a green one and a yellow one. Tales of great wars and great heroes for the men and boys. For the women and girls, the entire Authoritarian cycle. Tales of Arthur Pendrag,
Put this light back on.
Arthur Hawkwind, Arthur the High King, who once ruled all the lands from the Aida Waste to the Arctic Ocean, and even beyond.
I think that helps a little bit.
Wondrous stories of strange people and strange lands, of the Green Man, of borders and colors, of Ogier and Aida.
While you get one rolled up, I'll be right back.
The wise counselor, James the giant slayer, Althusser James James Farsighter, Mara and the 3 foolish kings. Tell us about land, said Wayne called. How he flew to the moon in the belly of an eagle made of fire. Tell about his daughter, Sylvia, walking among the stars. Van looked at her out of the corner of his eye, but she seemed intent on doing it. She had never liked stories about adventures and long journeys. Her favorites were always the funny ones, or stories about women outwitting people who were supposed to be smarter than everyone else. He was sure she had asked for tales about Van and Sylvia to put a burr under his shirt. Surely she could see the world outside was no place for 2 rivers folk. Listening to tales of adventures, even dreaming about them was one thing. Having them take place around you would be something else again. Old stories, though, Tom Maryland said, and abruptly he was circling 3 colored balls of each hand. Stories from the age before the age of legend, some say. Perhaps even older. But I have old stories, of ages that were and be. Ages when men ruled the heavens and the stars, and ages when man roamed as brother to the animals. Ages of wonder, ages of horror. Ages ended by fire raining from the sky, and ages doomed by snow and ice covering land and sea. I have old stories, and I will tell old stories.
Yeah, had to get it on clogged.
Of fire that could reach around the world, and it was with all things, the queen of all. Tales with Muttery, the healer, mother of the wondrous Ind, The balls now danced between Tom's hands in two intertwining circles. His voice was almost a chant. Then slowly as he spoke, so that surveying the onlookers, he gave them the fact. I will tell you of the end of the age of legend, of the dragon, and his attempt to free the dark one into the world of men. I will tell of the time of madness, when I could I shattered the world, of the Tonic War. Carol cured her husband of snow. Gareth and the fall of the houses. Abruptly the flow of words and the juggling of life stopped. Tom simply snatched the balls from the air and stopped talking. Unnoticed by Rand, Moraine had joined listening. The balls disappeared into his capacious toaster.
Gotta put this up
Then
there.
he
My
bowed
bad,
to her,
everyone.
holding his cloak wide.
Your pardon, but you are surely not from this district.
Lady, Eowyn hissed fiercely. The Lady Moraine. Tom blinked, then bowed again, more deeply.
Your pardon again, lady. I meant no disrespect.
Moraine made a small waving away gesture.
None was perceived, Master Bard.
And my name is simply Moraine.
I am indeed a stranger here, a traveler like yourself, far from home and alone. The world can be a dangerous place when one is a stranger.
The Lady Moraine collects stories, Eowyn put in. Stories about things that happened in the Two Rivers. Though I don't know whatever happened here to make a story of.
I trust you will like my stories as well, Moraine.
Tom watched her with obvious wariness. He looked not best pleased to find her there. Suddenly, Rand wondered what sort of entertainment a lady like her might be offered in a city like Fairlawn or Camelin. Surely it could not be anything better than a gleeman.
That is a matter of taste, Master Bard,
Moraine replied. Some stories I like.
Holding the mic's working too good for my voice.
Tom's bow was his deepest yet, bending his long body parallel to the ground.
I assure you, none of my stories will displease. All will please and entertain. And you do me too much honor. I am a simple gleeman. That, and nothing more.
Moraine answered his bow with a gracious nod. For an instant she seemed even more the Lady Eowyn had named her, accepting an offering from one of her subjects. Then she turned away, and Lan followed, a wolf heeling a gliding swan. Tom stared after them, bushy brows drawn down, stroking his long mustaches with a knuckle, until they were halfway up the green. He's not pleased at all, Rand thought. Are you going to juggle some more now? Eowyn demanded. Eat fire, Matt shouted. I want to see you eat fire. The harp, a voice cried from the crowd. Play the harp. Someone else called for the flute. At that moment, the door of the inn opened, and the village council trundled out.
I've been listening to the wrong book. There we go.
A cool spring breeze tickled Perrin's face. Such a breeze should have carried with it the sense of pollen and crisp morning dew, of dirt overturned by sprouts pushing into the light, of new life and an earth reborn. This breeze carried with it only the sense of blood and
There
death.
we go. Now we're on the right
Perrin
book.
turned his back to the breeze, knelt down and inspected the wagon's wheels. The vehicle was a sturdy construction of hickory, wood darkened with age. It appeared to be in good repair, but Perrin had learned to be careful when dealing with equipment from Malden.
Okay.
The Shido didn't scorn wagons and oxen as they
I
did
started
horses,
the right book now.
but they, like all Aiel, believed in traveling
I think
light.
it's mainly because
They hadn't maintained the wagons or carts,
some
and
of
Perrin
the
had found more than
speakers
one
covered
hidden
up, or the
flaw
mic
during his
covered up, since I
inspection.
have my tablet
Next,
sitting
he bellowed
vertical.
as he checked the first wheel's hub.
That's the only thing I could
The
figure.
comment was directed at the crowd of people waiting to speak with him. My
I
lord,
figure I'd try
a
it
voice
this way to
said.
see how it goes.
It was deep and rough, like wood scraping against wood. Gerard Arganda, first captain of Gildon. His scent was of well-oiled armor.
I must press the issue of our departure.
Look, I was playing.
Allow
we
me to
went-
ride
we went
ahead
back
with
a
Her
book or
Majesty.
two on that one.
The Her
Book
Majesty
two I
he
was playing
referred
just
to
a
was
second ago.
Aleandra, Queen of Gildan. Perrin continued working with the wheel. He wasn't as familiar with carpentry as he was with smithing, but his father had taught each of his sons to recognize signs of trouble in a wagon. Better to fix the problem before leaving than to be stranded
I
halfway
wanted
to
it
the
out to help
destination.
out since I lowered it a little bit.
Perrin ran his finger across the smooth brown hickory. The grain was clearly visible, and he tested for cracks with questing fingers, searching each point of stress.
I wanted to make sure that
All four
people actually
wheels
hear the
looked
book at
good.
a decent volume
My
without
lord,
having to turn it too high
Arganda
up.
asked.
We all march together.
Perrin said. That's my order, Arganda. I won't have the refugees thinking that we're abandoning them. Refugees. There were over 100,000 of those to care for. 100,000. Right, that was far more than lived in the entire Two Rivers. And Perrin was in charge of feeding every one of them. Wagons. Many men didn't understand the importance of a good wagon. He lay down on his back, preparing to inspect the axles, and that gave him a view of the overcast sky, partially blocked by Malden's nearby city wall. The city was large for one this far north in Altara. It was almost more of a fortress than a city, with daunting walls and towers. Until the day before, the land around this city had been home to the Shido Aiel. But they were gone now. Many killed, others fled, their captives freed by an alliance between Perrin's forces and the Shonchan. The Shido had left him two things: a scent of blood on the air, and 100,000 refugees to care for. Though he was happy to give them their freedom, his goal in liberating Malden had been far different: the rescue of Fail. Another Aiel group had been advancing on his position, but they'd slowed, then camped, and were no longer rushing toward Malden. Perhaps they'd been warned by Shido fleeing the battle that they had a large army before them, one that had defeated the Shido despite their channelers. It seemed this new group behind Perrin had as little desire to engage him as he had to engage them. That gave him time. A little bit, at least. Arganda was still watching. The captain wore his polished breastplate and had his slotted helmet under his arm. The squat man wasn't a puffed-up fluff of an officer, but a common man who had risen through the ranks. He fought well and did as instructed. Usually. I'm not going to bend on this, Arganda, Perrin said, pulling himself along the damp ground beneath the wagon. Could we at least use gateways instead? Arganda asked, kneeling down, graying hair shorn short, nearly brushing the ground as he peeked under the wagon. The Ashaman are near dead from fatigue, Perrin snapped. You know that. They're too tired for a large gateway, Arganda said. But maybe they could send a small group. My lady is exhausted from her captivity. Surely you don't mean for her to march. The refugees are too tired, Perrin said. Aleandra can have a horse to ride, but she's leaving when the rest of us do. Like sand that soon. Arganda sighed, but nodded. He stood up as Perrin ran his fingers along the axle. He could tell stress in wood with a glance, but he preferred touch. Touch was more reliable. There was always a crack or a splintering where wood weakened, and you could feel it near to breaking. Wood was reliable like that. Unlike men. Unlike himself. He gritted his teeth. He didn't want to think about that. He had to keep working, had to keep doing something to distract himself. He liked to work. He'd been given far too few opportunities for it lately. Next, he said, voice echoing against the bottom of the wagon. My lord, we should attack, a boisterous voice declared from beside the vehicle. Perrin thumped his head back against the well-trampled grass, closing his eyes. Bertin Galen, Lord Captain of the Winged Guards, was to Mayenne what Arganda was to Gildan. Aside from that single similarity, the two captains were about as different as men could be. Perrin could see Bertin's large, beautifully worked boots with clasps shaped like hawks from beneath the wagon. "My lord," Bertin continued, "a fine charge from the winged guard would scatter that Aiel rabble. Of this I'm certain. Why, we easily dealt with the Aiel here in the city." "We had the Sean-Chan then," Perrin said, finishing with the rear axle and wriggling his way to the front to check the other one. He wore his old, stained coat. Fail would chastise him for that. He was supposed to present himself as a lord. But would she really expect him to wear a fine coat if he was going to spend an hour lying in the muddy grass looking at the bottoms of wagons? Fail wouldn't want him to be in the muddy grass in the first place. Perrin hesitated, hand on the front axle, thinking of her raven hair and distinctive Saldean nose. She held the sum total of his love. She was everything to him. He had succeeded. He'd saved her. So why did he feel as if things were nearly as bad as they had been? He should rejoice. He should be ecstatic, should be relieved. He'd worried so much about her during her captivity. And yet now, with her safety secure, everything still felt wrong. Somehow.
Yeah, that's
In
good.
ways he
They
couldn't
wasn't too
explain.
bad.
Right.
Can't complain none.
Would nothing just work as it was supposed to?
I didn't have to do
He
it like
reached
that.
down for his pocket, wanting to finger the knotted cord he'd
Because
once
this,
carried there.
I'm using my
But he'd thrown
iPad
that
to do
away.
it this way, and
Stop
it doesn't have
he
a-
thought. She's
I
back.
don't think it has a light on it.
We can
that I
go back to
think
the
of.
way it was before. Can't we?
At least not on the front.
Yes,
I think
well,
the back part has
that
so
can
hard to turn
continue.
it around.
I suppose the departure of the
have it.
Sean-Chan could be a problem in and
That's
itself.
why everything's
But that Aiel
backwards.
group camped out there is smaller than what we already defeated. And if you are worried, you could
If I
send
do
word to the
that, I think I
Sean-Chan
can
general
have
and
a
bring her
light
back.
on it, but
Surely she would wish to fight alongside us again.
I
Perrin
might have
forced
to try
himself
that
back to the
next
moment.
time.
His own foolish problems were
But I have a
irrelevant.
little
Right now,
flashlight
he needed to get these
that I can
wagons
use for a
moving.
light.
The front axle was good. He turned and pushed himself out from underneath the wagon. Bertin was of medium height, though the three plumes rising from his helmet made him look taller. He had on his red eye patch. Perrin didn't know where he'd lost the eye, and his armor gleamed. He seemed excited. as
See
if he
how
thought
long I
Perrin's
can go with
silence
this
meant
on
they would
the
attack.
battery.
Perrin stood, dusting off his plain brown trousers. "We're leaving," he said, then held up a hand to forbid further argument. "We defeated the sects here, but we had them dosed with fork root, and there were demoni on our side. We're tired, wounded, and we have Fail back. There's no further reason to fight. We run." Bertin didn't look satisfied, but he nodded and turned away, stomping across the muddy ground toward where his men sat their mounts. Perrin looked at the small group of people who waited in a cluster around the wagon to speak with him. Once, this kind of business had frustrated Perrin. It seemed like pointless work, as many of the supplicants already knew what his answer would be. But they needed to hear those answers from him, and Perrin had come to understand the importance of that. Besides, their questions helped distract him from the strange tension he felt at having rescued Fail. He walked toward the next wagon in line, his small entourage following him. There were a good 50 of the wagons set in a long caravan train. The first ones were loaded with salvage from Malden. The middle ones were in the process of being treated likewise, and he had only 2 left to inspect. He had wanted to be well out of Malden before sunset. That would probably carry him far enough away to be safe. Unless these new Shido decided to give chase in revenge. With the number of people Perrin had to move, a blind man would be able to track them. The sun drooped toward the horizon, a shining spot behind the cloud cover. Light, but this was a mess. With the chaos of organizing refugees and separate army camps, getting away was supposed to be the easy part. The Shido camp was a disaster. His people had scavenged and packed many of the abandoned tents. Now cleared, the ground around the city was trampled weeds and mud, littered with refuse. The Shido, being Aiel, had preferred to camp outside the city walls, rather than within them. They were a strange people, no denying that. Who would spurn a nice bed, not to
Hell
mention
yeah.
a better military
Always gotta
position,
have that
to
propane
stay outside
on
in
deck for
tents?
some dabbing.
Aiel despised cities, though. Most of the buildings had either been burned during the initial Shido assault or looted for riches. Doors beaten down, windows shattered, possessions abandoned on the streets and trampled by Gaishain running back and forth to fetch water. People still scurried about like insects, moving through the city gates and around the former Shido camp, grabbing what they could to stow it for transport. They'd have to leave the wagons behind once they decided to travel. Grady couldn't make a gateway big enough to pass a wagon through. But for now, the vehicles would be a big help. There were also a good number of oxen. Someone else was inspecting those, making certain they were fit to pull the wagons. The Shido had let many of the city's horses run off. A shame, that. But you made use of what you had. Perrin reached the next wagon, beginning his inspection with the vehicle's long tongue, to which oxen would be harnessed. "My lord," said a scratchy voice, "I believe that I am next." Perrin glanced over at the speaker. Sebin Bulwer, his secretary. The man had a dry, pinched face and a perpetual stoop that made him look almost like a roosting vulture. Though his coat and breeches were clean, it seemed to Perrin that they should shed puffs of dust each time Bulwer stepped. He smelled musty, like an old book. "Bulwer," Perrin said, running his fingers over the tongue, then checking the harness straps. "I thought you were speaking with the captives." "I have indeed been busy with my work there," Bulwer said. "However, I grew curious. Did you have to let the Shon-Chan take all of the captive Shido channelers with them?" Perrin glanced at the musty secretary. The wise ones who could channel had been knocked unconscious by Forkroot. They'd been given over to the Shon-Chan while still unconscious, to do with as they pleased. The decision had not made Perrin popular with the Aiel among his allies, but he would not have those channelers running about to take revenge on him. "I don't see why I would want them," he said to Bulwer. "Well, my lord, there is much of great interest to learn. For instance, it appears that many of the Shido are ashamed of their clan's behavior. The wise ones themselves were at odds. Also, they have had dealings with some very curious individuals who offered them objects of power from the Age of Legends. Whoever they were, they could make gateways." "Forsaken," Perrin said with a shrug, stooping down on one knee to check the right front wheel. "I doubt we'll figure out which ones. Probably had a disguise on." From the corner of his eyes, he saw Bulwer purse his lips at that comment. "You disagree?" Perrin asked. "No, my lord," he said. "The objects the Shido were given are very suspect, by my estimation. The Aiel were duped, though for what reason I cannot yet fathom. However, if we had more time to search the city..." Light. Was every person in the camp going to ask him for something they knew they couldn't have? He got down on the ground to check the back of the wheel hub. Something about it bothered him. "We already know that the Forsaken oppose us, Bulwer. They won't rightly welcome Rand in with open arms to seal them away again, or whatever it is he's going to do." Blasted colors showing Rand in his mind's eye. He pushed those away again. They appeared whenever he thought of Rand or Matt, bringing visions of them. "Anyway," Perrin continued, "I don't see what you need me to do. We'll take the Shido Gaishain with us. The maidens captured their fair share. You can interrogate them. But we're leaving this place." "Yes, my lord," Bulwer said. "It's just a shame we lost those wise ones. My experience has been that they are those among the Aiel with the most understanding." "The Shon-Chan wanted them," Perrin said, "so they got them. I wouldn't let Adara bully me on the point, and what is done is done."
What do you expect of me, Bulwer?
Perhaps a message could be sent, Bulwer said, to ask some questions of the wise ones when they awake. He stopped, then stooped down to glance at Perrin. My lord, this is rather distracting. Couldn't we find someone else to inspect the wagons?
Everyone else is either too tired or too busy, Perrin said. I want most of the refugees waiting in the camps to move when we get the marching order. And most of our soldiers are scavenging the city for supplies. Each handful of grain they find will be needed. Half the stuff's spoiled anyway. I can't help with that work since I need to be where people can find me. He'd accepted that, cross though it made him.
Yes, my lord, Bulwer said. But surely you can be somewhere accessible without crawling under wagons.
It's work I can do while people talk to me, Perrin said. You don't need my hands, just my tongue. And that tongue is telling you to forget Biail.
But
there is nothing more I can do, Bulwer, Perrin said firmly, glancing up at him through the spokes of the wheel. We're heading north. I'm done with the Shido. They can burn for all I care.
Bulwer pursed his thin lips again, and he smelled just slightly of annoyance. Of course, my lord, he said, giving a quick bow. Then he withdrew. Perrin squirmed out and stood up, nodding to a young woman who stood in a dirty dress and worn shoes at the side of the line of wagons.
Go fetch Lincoln, he said. Tell him to have a look at this wheel hub. I think the bearing's been stripped, and the blasted thing looks ready to roll right off.
The young woman nodded, running away. Lincoln was a master carpenter who had been unfortunate enough to be visiting relatives in Cairhien when the Shido attacked. He'd had the will beaten nearly out of him. Perhaps he should have been the one to inspect the wagons, but with that haunted look in his eyes, Perrin wasn't sure how far he trusted the man to do a proper inspection. He seemed good enough at fixing problems when they were pointed out to him, though. And the truth was, as long as Perrin kept moving, he felt he was doing something, making progress, not thinking about other issues. Wagons were easy to fix. They weren't like people. Not at all. Perrin turned, glancing across the empty camp, pocked with fire pits and discarded rags. Fail was walking back toward the city. She'd been organizing some of her followers to scout the area. She was striking, beautiful. That beauty wasn't just in her face or her lean figure. It was in how easily she commanded people, how quickly she always knew what to do. She was clever in a way Perrin never had been. He wasn't stupid. He just liked to think about things. But he'd never been good with people. Not like Matt or Rand. Fail had shown him that he didn't need to be good with people, or even with women, as long as he could make one person understand him. He didn't have to be good at talking to anyone else, as long as he could talk to her. But now he couldn't find the words to say. He worried about what had happened to her during her captivity, but the possibilities didn't bother him. They made him angry, but none of what had happened was her fault. You did what you had to survive. He respected her for her strength. Right, he thought. I'm thinking again. Need to keep working. Next, he bellowed, stooping down to continue his inspection of the wagon. If I'd seen your face and nothing else, lad, a hearty voice said, I'd assumed that we'd lost this battle. Perrin turned with surprise. He hadn't realized that Thor was one of those waiting to speak with him. That crowd had thinned, but there were still some messengers in attendance. At the back, the blocky, solid sheep herder leaned on his quarterstaff as he waited. His hair had all gone to silver. Perrin could remember a time when it had been a deep black, back when Perrin had just been a boy, before he'd known a hammer or a forge. Perrin's fingers reached down, touching the hammer at his waist. He'd chosen it over the axe. It had been the right decision, but he'd still lost control of himself in the Battle of Malden. Was that what bothered him? Or was it how much he'd enjoyed the killing? "What do you need, Tam?" he asked. "I'm only bringing a report, my lord," Tam said. "The Two Rivers men are organized for the march, each man with 2 tents on his back just in case. We couldn't use water from the city on account of the fork route, so I sent some lads to the aqueduct to fill some barrels there. We could use a wagon to bring them back." "Done," Perrin said, smiling. Finally, someone who did things that were needed without having to ask first. "Tell the Two Rivers men that I intend to have them back home as soon as possible. The moment Grady and Niald are strong enough to make a gateway. That could be a while, though." "That's appreciated, my lord," Tam said. It felt so strange for him to use a title. "Can I speak to you alone for a moment, though?" Perrin nodded, noticing that Lincoln was coming. His limp was distinctive, to look at the wagon. Perrin moved with Tam away from the group of attendants and guards, walking into the shadow of Malden's wall. Moss grew green against the base of the massive blocks making up the fortification. It was strange that the moss was far brighter than the trampled, muddied weeds under their feet. Nothing but moss seemed green this spring. "What is it, Tam?" Perrin asked as soon as they were far enough away. Tam rubbed his face. There was gray stubble coming in. Perrin had pushed his men hard these last few days, and there hadn't been time for shaving. Tam wore a simple blue wool coat, and the thick cloth was probably a welcome shield against the mountain breeze. "The lads are wondering, Perrin," Tam said, a little less formal now that they were alone. "Did you mean what you said about giving up on Manetheren?" "Aye," Perrin said. "That banner has been nothing but trouble since it first came out. The Sean-Chan and everyone else might as well know. I'm no king." "You have a queen who's sworn you as her liege." He considered Tam's words, working out the best response. Once that kind of behavior had made people think he was slow of thought. Now people assumed his thoughtfulness meant that Perrin was crafty and keen-minded. What a difference a few fancy words in front of your name made. "I think you're right in what you did," Tam said surprisingly. "Calling the Two Rivers Manetheren would not only have antagonized the Sean-Chan, but the Queen of Andor herself. It would imply that you meant to hold more than just the Two Rivers. That perhaps you wanted to conquer all that Manetheren once held." Perrin shook his head. "I don't mean to conquer anything, Tam. Light. I don't mean to hold what people say I've got. The sooner that Elaine takes her throne and sends a proper lord out to the Two Rivers, the better. We can be done with all of this Lord Perrin business and things can go back to normal." "And Queen Alejandra?" Tam asked. "She can swear to Elaine instead,"
Yeah, cheers.
Perrin said stubbornly. "Or maybe directly to Rand. He seems to like scooping up kingdoms, like a child playing a game of wobbles." Tam smelled concerned, troubled. Perrin looked away. "Things should be simpler. They should be." "What?" "I just thought you were over this," Tam said. "Nothing has changed from the days before Fail was taken," Perrin said. "I still don't like that wolf-head banner either. I think maybe it's time to take that one down too." "The men believe in that banner, Perrin lad," Tam said quietly. He had a soft way about him, but that made you listen when he spoke. Of course, he also usually spoke sense. "I pulled you aside because I wanted to warn you. If you provide a chance for the lads to return to the Two Rivers, some will go, but not many. I've heard most swear that they'll follow you to Sheol Ghul. They know the last battle is coming. Who couldn't know that, with all of the signs lately? They don't intend to be left behind." He hesitated. "And neither do I reckon." He smelled of determination. "We'll see," Perrin said, frowning. "We'll see." He sent Tam off with orders to requisition a wagon and take it for those water barrels. The soldiers would listen. Tam was Perrin's first captain, though that seemed backward to Perrin. He didn't know much of the man's past, but Tam had fought in the Aiel War long ago. He'd held a sword before Perrin had been born, and now he followed Perrin's orders. They all did, and they wanted to keep doing so. Hadn't they learned? He rested back against the wall, not walking back to his attendants, standing in the shadow. Now that he seized upon it, he realized that was a part of what was bothering him. Not the whole of it, but some, tied in with what was troubling him. Even now that Fail had returned. He hadn't been a good leader lately. He'd never been a model one, of course, not even when Fail had been there to guide him. But during her absence, he'd been worse, far worse. He'd ignored his orders from Rand, ignored everything, all to get her back. But what else was a man supposed to do? His wife had been kidnapped. He'd saved her, but in doing so, he'd abandoned everyone else. And because of him, men were dead, good men who had trusted in him. Standing in that shadow, he remembered a moment, only a day past, when an ally had fallen to Aiel arrows, his heart poisoned by Massima. Aram had been a friend, one that Perrin had discarded in his quest to save Fail. Aram had deserved better. I should never have let that tinker pick up a sword, he thought. But he didn't want to deal with this problem right now. He couldn't. There was too much to do. He moved away from the wall, planning to inspect the last wagon in line. Next, he barked as he began again. Arabine Carnell stepped
I don't
forward.
know why he's doing that.
The Amadisian woman no longer wore her Gaishain robes. Instead, she had on a simple light green dress, not clean, that had been pulled out of the salvage. She was plump, but her face still bore a haggard cast from her days as a captive. There was a determination about her. She was surprisingly good at organization, and Perrin suspected she was of noble heritage. She had the scent of it about her, self-confidence, and ease giving commands. It was a wonder those things had survived her captivity. As he knelt down to look at the first wheel, he figured it was odd that Fail had chosen Aravine to supervise the refugees. Why not one of the youths from Chafail? Those dandies could be annoying, but they'd shown a surprising measure of confidence. My lord, Aravine said, her practiced curtsy another indication of her background.
Well, I had
I
some
have finished
dabs,
organizing the people for departure. So soon? Perrin asked, looking up from the wheel.
I got my pins, so I
It
guess
was
that
not so
helps.
difficult as we expected, my lord. I commended them together by nationality, then by town of birth. I commended them together by nationality, then by town of birth. I commended them together by nationality, then by town of birth. I commended them together by nationality, then by town of birth.
I'm not sure what's going on with chat. Oh wait, the messages are coming out. I'm not sure what's going on with chat. Oh wait, the messages
Not surprisingly, the Carianin formed the largest bulk of them, followed by Altarans, the Amadisians, with some smattering of others. A few Domani, some Taraboners, the occasional Borderlander or Tyran. How many can stand a day or two of marching without a ride in the wagons? Most of them, my lord, she said. The sick and elderly were expelled from the city when the Shido took it. The people here are accustomed to being worked hard. They're exhausted, lord, but none too eager to be waiting here with those other Shido camped not half a day's march away. All right, Perrin said. Start them marching immediately. Immediately? Aravine asked with surprise. He nodded. I want them on that road marching northward as soon as you can get them going. I'll send Aleandra and her guard to lead the way. That ought to keep Arganda from complaining, and it would get the refugees out of the way. The maidens would be far better and far more efficient at gathering supplies alone. The scavenging was nearly finished anyway. His people would have to survive on the road for only a few weeks. After that, they could jump via gateway to someplace more secure. Andor, perhaps, or Kyrian. Those Shido behind him had him anxious. They could decide to attack at any time. Better to get away and remove the temptation. Aravine curtsied and hurried away to make preparations, and Perrin thanked the light for someone else who didn't see a need to question or second-guess him. He sent a boy to inform Arganda of the impending march, then finished his inspection of the wagon. After that, he stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Next," he said. Nobody stepped forward. The only people remaining around him were guards, messenger boys, and a few wagoneers waiting to hitch up their oxen and move the wagons off for loading. The maidens had made a large pile of foodstuffs and supplies in the middle of the former camp, and Perrin could make out Fail there working to organize it. Perrin sent the ring of attendants with him over to help her, then found himself alone, with nothing to do. Just what he'd wanted to avoid. The wind blew past again, carrying that awful stench of death. It also carried memories. The fury of the battle, the passion and thrill of each swing. Aiel were excellent warriors, the best the land knew. Each exchange had been close, and Perrin had earned his share of cuts and bruises, though those had since been healed. Fighting the Aiel had made him feel alive. Each one he'd slain had been an expert with the spears. Each one could have killed him. But he'd won. During those moments of fighting, he'd felt a driving passion. The passion of finally doing something. After 2 months of waiting, each blow had meant a step closer to finding Fail. No more talking, no more planning. He'd found purpose. And now it was gone. He felt hollow. It was like the time when his father had promised him something special as a gift for winter night. Perrin had waited months, eager, doing his chores to earn the unknown gift. When he'd finally received the small wooden horse, he'd been excited for a moment. But the next day, he'd been shockingly melancholy. Not because of the gift, but because there had no longer been anything to strive for. The excitement was gone, and only then had he realized how much more precious he'd found that anticipation than the gift itself. Soon after that, he'd begun visiting Master Luhan's forge, eventually becoming his apprentice. He was glad to have Fail back. He rejoiced. And yet now, what was there for him? These blasted men saw him as their leader. Some even thought of him as their king. He'd never asked for that. He'd had them put away the banners every time they put them out, up until Fail had persuaded him that using them would be an advantage. He still didn't believe that the Wolfhead banner belonged there, flapping insolently above his camp. But could he take it down? The men did look to it. He could smell pride on them every time they passed it. He couldn't turn them away. Rand would need their aid. He'd need everyone's aid at the last battle. The last battle. Could a man like him, a man who didn't want to be in charge, lead these forces to the most important moment in their lives? The colors swirled, showing him Rand sitting in what appeared to be a stone Tyran home. Perrin's old friend had a dark cast to his expression, like a man troubled by weighty thoughts. Even sitting like that, Rand looked regal. He was what a king was supposed to be, with that rich red coat, that noble bearing. Perrin was just a blacksmith. He sighed, shaking his head and dispelling the image. He needed to seek out Rand. He could feel something tugging at him, pulling him. Rand needed him. That had to be his focus now. Chapter 10. The Last of the Tabak. Rodolai Taralda puffed quietly on his pipe, smoke curling from it like the sinuous coils of a snake. The smoke tendrils wrapped around themselves, pooling at the ceiling above him, then leaking out through cracks in the roof of the ramshackle shed. The boards in the walls were warped from age, opening slits to the outside, and the gray wood was cracked and splintering. A brazier burned in a corner, and winds whistled through the cracks in the walls. Taralda faintly worried those winds would blow over the entire building. He sat on a stool, several maps on the table before him. At the corner of the table, his tobacco pouch weighed down a wrinkled piece of paper. The small square was weathered and folded from being carried in his inside coat pocket. "Well?" Rajabi asked. Thick of neck and determined of attitude, he was brown-eyed with a wide nose and a bulbous chin. He was completely bald now and faintly resembled a large boulder. He tended to act like a boulder, too. It could take a lot of work to get him rolling. But once you did, he was bloody hard to stop. He had been one of the first to join Aitaralda's cause, for all the fact that he had been poised to rebel against the king just a short time before. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Aitaralda's victory at Darluna. He'd extended himself far for that victory, perhaps too far. "Ah, El Salam," he thought. "I hope this was all worth it, old friend. I hope I wasn't just going mad. Rajabi might be a boulder, but the Shonchan are an avalanche, and we've brought them thundering down upon us." "What now?" Rajabi prodded. "We wait," Aitaralda said. Light, but he hated waiting. "Then we fight, or maybe we run again. I haven't made up my mind yet." "The Terrabonners won't come," Aitaralda said. "They promised." "They did." Aitaralda had gone to them himself, had roused them, had asked them to fight the Shonchan just one more time. They'd yelled and cheered, but had not followed with any haste. They would drag their feet. He'd gotten them to fight one last time on half a dozen different occasions now. They could see where this war was going, and he could no longer depend on them, if he'd ever been able to in the first place. "Bloody cowards," Rajabi muttered. "Like, burn them then. We'll do it alone. We have before." Aitaralda took a long, contemplative puff on his pipe. He'd chosen to finally use the Two Rivers tobacco. This pipeful was the last in his store. He'd been saving it for months now. Good flavor, best there was. He studied his maps again, holding a smaller one up before him. He could use better maps, that was certain. "This new Shonchan general," Aitaralda said, "is marshaling over 300,000 men with a good 200 Damani. We've beat large forces before. Look what we did at Darluna. You crushed them, Rodel." And doing so had required every bit of craftiness, skill, and luck Aitaralda could muster. Even then, he'd lost well over half his men. Now he ran, limping before this second, larger force of Shonchan. This time, they weren't making any mistakes. The Shonchan didn't rely solely on their Rakan. His men had intercepted several foot scouts, and that meant dozens hadn't been caught. This time, the Shonchan knew Aitaralda's true numbers and his true location. His enemies were done being herded and goaded. Instead, they hunted him relentlessly, avoiding his traps. Aitaralda had planned to retreat deeper and deeper into Arad Daman. That would favor his forces and stretch the Shonchan supply lines. He'd figured he could keep it up for another 4 or 5 months. But those plans were useless now. They'd been made before Aitaralda had discovered there was an entire bloody army of Aiel running about Arad Daman. If the reports were to be believed, and reports about Aiel were often exaggerations, so he wasn't sure how much to believe, there were upwards of 100,000 of them, holding large sections of the north, Bandar Eben included. 100,000 Aiel. That was as good as 200,000 Damani troops, perhaps more. Aitaralda well remembered the blood snow 20 years ago, when it had seemed he'd lost 10 men for each Aiel who fell. He was trapped, a walnut crushed between 2 stones. The best he'd been able to do was retreat here, to this abandoned steading. That would give him an edge against the Shonchan, but only a small one. The Shonchan had a force 6 times the size of his own, and the greenest of commanders knew that fighting those odds was suicide.
I'll be right back.
"Have you ever seen a master juggler, Rajabi?" Aitaralda asked, studying the map. From the corner of his eye, Ituralda saw the bull-like man frown in confusion. I've seen gleemen who... No, not a gleeman. A master. Rajabi shook his head. Ituralda puffed in thought before speaking. I did once. He was the court bard of Camelon. Spry fellow, with a wit that might better have belonged in a common room, for all the way he was decorated. Bards don't often juggle, but this fellow didn't mind the request. He liked juggling to please the young daughter heir, so I understand. He removed the pipe from his mouth, tapping down the tobacco. Rodo, Rajabi said. The Shonchan. Rodo held up a finger, situating his pipe before continuing. The bard started by juggling 3 balls. Then he asked us if we thought he could do another. We cheered him on. He went to 4, then 5, then 6. With each ball he added, our applause grew greater, and he always asked if we thought he could do another. Of course, we said yes. 7, 8, 9... Soon he had 10 balls going in the air, flying in a pattern so complex that I couldn't track them. He had to strain to keep them going. He kept having to reach down and grab balls that he nearly missed. He was too lost in concentration to ask us if he should add another, but the crowd called for it. 11. Go for 11. And so his assistant tossed another ball into the mess. Ituralda puffed. He dropped them? Rajabi asked. Rodel shook his head. That last ball wasn't actually a ball at all. It was some kind of illuminator's trick. Once it got halfway to the bard, it flashed and gave off a sudden burst of light and smoke. By the time our vision cleared, the bard was gone, and 10 balls were lined up on the floor. When I looked around, I found him sitting at one of the tables with the rest of the diners, drinking a cup of wine and flirting with Lord Findal's wife. Poor Rajabi looked completely dumbfounded. He liked his answers neat and straightforward. Ituralda usually felt the same way. But these days, with their unnaturally overcast skies and sense of perpetual gloom, made him philosophic. He reached out and took the worn, folded sheet of paper off the table from beneath his tobacco pouch. He handed it to Rajabi. Strike hard against the Shonchan, Rajabi said. Push them away. Force them into their boats and back across their bloody ocean. I'm counting on you, old friend. King Al-Salam. Rajabi lowered the letter. I know of his orders, Rodo. I didn't come into this because of him. I came because of you. Yes, but I fight because of him, Ituralda said. He was a king's man. He always would be. He stood up, tapping out his tobacco and grinding the embers beneath the heel of his boot. He set the pipe aside and took the letter from Rajabi, then walked to the door. He needed to make a decision. Stay and fight, or flee for a worse location, but gain a little more time. The shack groaned, and wind shook the trees as Ituralda stepped outside into the overcast morning. The shed wasn't Ogier-built, of course. It was too flimsy for that. This steading had been abandoned for a long time. His men camped amid the trees. Hardly the best location for a war camp, but one made soup with the spices on hand. The setting was far too useful to pass up. Another man might have fled to a city and hidden behind its walls. But here in these trees, the one power was useless. Negating the Shonchan Damani was better than walls, no matter how high. We have to stay, Ituralda thought, watching his men work, digging in, erecting a palisade. He hated the thought of cutting down trees in a steading. He'd known a few Ogier in his time, and respected them. These massive oaks probably held some lingering strength from the days when the Ogier had lived here. Cutting them down was a crime, but you did what you had to. Running might gain him more time, but it might just as easily lose him time. He had a few days here before the Shonchan hit him. If he could dig in well, he might force them into a siege. The steading would make them hesitant, and the forests would work to the advantage of Iturralda's smaller force. He hated letting himself get pinned in. That was probably why he'd considered for so long, even though deep down he'd already known that it was time to stop running. The Shanshan had finally caught him. He continued along the ranks, nodding to working men, letting himself be seen. He had 40,000 troops left, which was a marvel considering the odds they had faced. These men should have deserted, but they'd seen him win impossible battle after impossible battle, tossing ball after ball into the air to greater and greater applause. They thought he was unstoppable. They didn't understand that when one tossed more balls into the air, it wasn't just the show that became more spectacular. The fall at the end grew more spectacular as well. He kept his dark thoughts to himself as he and Rajabi continued through the forested camp, inspecting the palisade. It was progressing nicely, the men setting thick tree trunks into freshly dug troughs. After his inspection, Iturralda nodded to himself. "We stay, Rajabi. Pass the word." "Some of the others say that staying here means dying for sure," Rajabi responded. "They're wrong," Iturralda said. "But nothing is sure, Rajabi," Iturralda said. "Build these trees inside the palisade with archers. They'll be almost as effective as towers. We'll need to set up a killing field outside. Cut down as many trees around the palisade here as possible. Then set the logs inside as barriers, a second line of retreat. We'll hold strong. Perhaps I'm wrong about those Terrabonners, and they'll ride to aid us. Or maybe the king has a hidden army stashed away to defend us. Blood and ashes, maybe we'll fight them off here on our own. We'll see how much they like fighting without their Damani. We'll survive." Rajabi straightened visibly, growing confident. That was the kind of talk Iturralda knew he expected. Like the others, Rajabi trusted the little wolf. They didn't believe he could fail. Iturralda knew better. But if you're going to die, you did it with dignity. The young Iturralda had often dreamed of wars, of the glory of battle. The old Iturralda knew there was no such thing as glory to be had in battle. But there was honor. "My lord Iturralda," a runner called, trotting along the inside of the unfinished palisade wall. He was a boy, young enough that the Shanshan would probably let him live. Otherwise, Iturralda would have sent the lad, and those like him, away. "Yes?" Iturralda asked, turning. Rajabi stood like a small mountain at his side.
There we go.
"A man," the boy said, puffing. "The scouts caught him walking into the steading." "Come to fight for us," Iturralda said. It was not uncommon for an army to draw recruits. There were always those tempted by the lure of glory, or at least by the lure of steady meals. "No, my lord," the boy said, puffing. "He says he's come to see you." "Shanshan," Rajabi barked. The boy shook his head. "No, but he's got nice clothes." Some lord's messenger, then. Damani, or perhaps a Terrabonner renegade. Whoever he was, he could hardly make their situation worse. "And he came alone?" "Yes, sir." Brave man. "Bring him, then," Iturralda said. "Where will you receive him, my lord?" "What?" Iturralda snapped. "You think I'm some fancy merchant with a palace? The field here will do. Go get him. But take your time getting back. And make sure he's properly guarded." The boy nodded and ran off. Iturralda waved over some soldiers and sent them running for Wakeda and the other officers. Shimron was dead, burned to char by Damani's fireball. Too bad, that. Iturralda would rather have kept him than many of the others. Most of the officers arrived before the stranger. Lanky Anker, one-eyed Wakeda, who might otherwise have been a handsome man, squat Malarned, youthful Lidrin, who continued to follow Iturralda after his father's death.
Right.
"What is this I hear?" Wakeda asked, folding his arms as he strode up. "We're staying in this death trap. Rodo, we don't have the troops to resist. If they come, we'll be trapped here." "You're right," Iturralda said simply. Wakeda turned to the others, then back to Ituralda. A little of his irritation deflated in the face of Ituralda's frank answer. Well, why don't we run then? He blustered a lot less now than he had just months ago when Ituralda had first begun this campaign. I won't give you sugar and lies, Ituralda said, looking at them each in turn. We're in bad shape, but we'll be in a worse shape if we run. We've got no more holes to hide in. These trees will work to our advantage, and we can fortify. The steading will negate the Damani, and that alone is worth the price of staying. We fight here. Anker nodded, seeming to understand the gravity of the situation. We have to trust him, Wakeda. He's led us right so far. Wakeda nodded. I suppose. Bloody fools. 4 months ago, half of them would have killed him on sight for staying loyal to the king. Now they thought he could do the impossible. It was a pity. He was beginning to think he could have brought them back to Al Salam as loyalists. All right, he said, pointing at various spots along their fortification. Here's what we're going to do to shore up the weak points. I want... He trailed off as he saw a group approaching through the clearing. The messenger boy, accompanied by a squad of soldiers escorting a man in red and gold. Something about the newcomer drew Ituralda's eyes. Perhaps it was the height. The young man was as tall as an Aiel, and fair of hair like them as well. But no Aiel dressed in a fine red coat with sharp golden embroidery. There was a sword at his side, and the way the newcomer walked made Ituralda think he knew how to use it. He strode with firm, determined steps, as if he thought the soldiers around him an honor guard. A lord, then, and one accustomed to command. Why had he come in person, rather than sending a messenger? The young lord stopped a short length in front of Ituralda and his generals, looking at each of them in turn, then focused on Ituralda. Rodil Ituralda? He asked. What accent was that? Andarin? Yes, Ituralda said cautiously. The young man nodded. Bashir's description was accurate. You appear to be boxing yourself in here. Do you honestly expect to hold against the Shom-Chan army? They are many times your size, and your Terraban allies do not appear eager to join you in your defense. He had good intelligence, whoever he was. I am not in the habit of discussing my defenses with strangers. Ituralda studied the young lord. He was fit, lean and hard, though it was difficult to tell with the coat on. He favored his right hand, and on closer inspection, Ituralda noticed that the left hand was missing. Both of his forearms had some kind of strange red and gold tattoo on them. Those eyes. Those were eyes which had seen death a number of times. Not just a young lord, a young general. Ituralda narrowed his eyes. Who are you? The stranger met his eyes. I am Randolph Thor, the Dragon Reborn. And I need you. You and your army. Several of those with Ituralda cursed, and Ituralda glanced at them. Wakeda was incredulous, Rajabi surprised, young Lidrin openly dismissive. Ituralda looked back at the newcomer. The Dragon Reborn? This youth? He supposed it could be possible. Most rumors agreed that the Dragon Reborn was a young man with red hair. But then rumors also claimed he was 10 feet tall, and still others said his eyes glowed in dim light. And then there were the stories of him appearing in the sky at Falma. Blood and ashes, Ituralda didn't know if he believed that the dragon had been reborn in the first place. I haven't time to argue, the stranger said, face impassive. He seemed older than he looked. He didn't appear to care that he was surrounded by armed soldiers. In fact, his coming alone, it should have seemed like such a foolish act. Instead, it made Ituralda thoughtful. Only one such as the Dragon Reborn himself could stride into a war camp like this, completely alone, and expect to be obeyed. Burn him if that fact by itself didn't make Ituralda want to believe him. Either this man was who he claimed to be, or he was an utter lunatic. If we go outside the steading, I will prove if I can channel, the stranger said. That should count for something. Give me leave, and I'll have 10,000 Aiel here, and several Aes Sedai, all of whom will swear to you that I am who I say. The rumors also said Aiel followed the Dragon Reborn. The men around Aitoralda coughed and glanced about uncomfortably. Many had been dragons sworn before coming to Aitoralda. With the right words, this Rand al'Thor, or whoever he was, might be able to turn Aitoralda's camp against itself. Even if we assume that I believe you, Aitoralda said carefully, I don't see that it matters. I have a war to fight. You have other business to concern you, I assume. You are my concern, al'Thor said, eyes so hard that they seemed ready to burrow into Aitoralda's skull and search about inside for anything of use. You must make peace with the Shongshan. This war gains us nothing. I want you up on the borderlands. I can't spare men to guard the Blight, and the borderlanders themselves have abandoned their duties. I have orders, Aitoralda said, shaking his head. Wait, he wouldn't do as this youth asked if he didn't have orders. Except those eyes. El-Salam had eyes like that when they were both younger. Eyes that demanded obedience. Your orders, al'Thor said. They are from the king? That is why you throw yourselves against the Shongshan as you do? Aitoralda nodded. I've heard of you, Rodo Aitoralda, al'Thor said. Men I trust, men I respect, trust and respect you. Rather than fleeing and hiding, you hunker down here to fight a battle you know will kill you. All because of your loyalty to your king. I commend that. But it is time to turn away and fight a battle that means something. One that means everything. Come with me and I'll give you the throne of Arad Daman. Aitoralda stood up sharply, alert. After commending my loyalty, you expect me to unseat my own king? Your king is dead, al'Thor said. Either that or his mind has been melted like wax. More and more I think Braindoll has him. I see her touch on a chaos in this land. Whatever orders you have likely came from her. Why she wants you fighting the Shongshan, I haven't yet been able to determine. Aitoralda snorted. You speak of one of the Forsaken as if you've had her as a dinner guest. al'Thor met his eyes again. I remember each of them. Their faces, their mannerisms, the way they speak and act. As if I've known them for 1,000 years. I remember them better than I remember my own childhood sometimes. I am the Dragon Reborn. Aitoralda blinked. Burn me, he thought. I believe him. Bloody ashes. Let's see this proof of yours. There were objections, of course, mostly from Lidrin, who thought it too dangerous. The others were shaken. Here was the man they'd sworn themselves to without ever meeting him. There seemed to be a force about al'Thor, drawing Aitoralda in, demanding that he do as asked. Well, he'd see the proof first. They sent runners for horses to ride out of the steading, but al'Thor spoke as if Aitoralda was his man already. Perhaps Al-Salam lives, al'Thor said as they waited. If so, I can see that you would not want his throne. Would you like Amadicia? I will need someone to rule there and keep an eye on the Shongshan. The White Cloaks fight there now. I'm not sure if I'll be able to stop that conflict before the last battle. The last battle. Light. I won't take it if you kill the king there, Aitoralda said. If the White Cloaks have already killed him, or if the Shongshan have, then perhaps. King? What was he saying? Burn you, he thought to himself. At least wait until the proof is given before agreeing to accept thrones. There was a way about this man, the way he discussed events like the last battle, events that mankind had been fearing for thousands of years, as if they were items on the daily camp report. soldiers arrived with their horses, and Ituralda mounted, as did Althor, Wakeda, Rajabi, Anker, Melanid, Lidrin, and half a dozen lesser officers. "I've brought a large number of Aiel into your lands," Randall Thor said as they began to ride. "I had hoped to use them to restore order, but they are taking longer than I'd wished. I'm planning to secure the members of the Merchant Council. Perhaps once I have them in hand, I'll be able to improve the stability of the area. What do you think?" Ituralda didn't know what to think. Securing the Merchant Council? That sounded like kidnapping them. What had Ituralda gotten himself into? "It could work," he found himself saying. "Light is probably the best plan, all things considered." Althor nodded, looking forward as they passed out of the palisade and moved out along a trail toward the edge of the steading. "I'll have to secure the borderlands anyway. I will care for your homeland. Burn those borderlanders. What are they up to?" No, not yet. They can wait. No, he'll do. He can hold it. I'll send him with Ashaman. Suddenly, Althor turned to Ituralda. "What could you do if I gave you 100 men who could channel?" "Madmen?" "No, most of them are stable," Althor said, taking no apparent offense. "Whatever madness they incurred before I cleansed the taint is still there. Removing the taint didn't heal them. But few of them were far gone. And they won't get worse, now that Saidin is clean." "Saidin? Clean?" If Ituralda had his own men who could channel, his own Damani, in a way. Ituralda scratched his chin. It was coming at him quickly, but then a general had to be able to react quickly. "I could use them well," he said. "Very well." "Good," Althor said. They had left the steading. The air felt different. "You've got a lot of land to watch, but many of the channelers I'll give you can spin gateways." "Gateways?" Ituralda asked. Althor glanced at him, then seemed to grit his teeth, closing his eyes, shaking as if nauseated. Ituralda sat upright, suddenly alert, hand on his sword. Poison? Was the man wounded? But no, Althor opened his eyes, and there seemed to be a look of ecstasy in those depths. He turned, waving a hand, and a line of light split the air in front of him. Men around Ituralda cursed, backing up. It was one thing for a man to claim he could channel. It was another to see him do so in front of you. "That's the gateway," Althor said as the line of light turned around, opening a large black hole in the air. Depending on the Ashaman's strength, a gateway can be made wide enough to drive wagons through. You can travel nearly anywhere with speed, sometimes instantly, depending on circumstances. With a few trained Ashaman, your army could dine in Camelin in the morning, then have lunch in Tenchico a few hours later. Ituralda rubbed his chin. "Well now, that's a thing to see. A thing to see indeed." If this man spoke truthfully, and these gateways really did work, with this I could clear the Shanshan out of Terabon, and maybe off the land entirely. "No," Althor snapped. "We make peace with them. From what my scouts say, it's going to be hard enough to bring them to agreement without promising them your head. I won't rile them further. There is no time for squabbling. We have more important matters to be about." "Nothing is more important than my homeland," Ituralda said. "Even if those orders are forged, I know Al-Salam. He would agree with me. We won't stand for foreign troops on the soil of Arad Daman." "A promise, then," Althor said. "I will see the Shonchan out of Arad Daman. I promise you this. But we don't fight them away any further than that. In exchange, you go to the borderlands and protect against an invasion there. Hold back the Trollocs if they come, and lend me some of your officers to help secure Arad Daman. It will be easier to restore order if the people see that their own lords are working with me." Ituralda considered, though he knew already what his answer would be. That gateway could spirit his men away from this death trap. With Aiel on his side, with the Dragon Reborn as an ally, He really did have a chance of keeping our Daman secure. An honorable death was a good thing, but the ability to keep on fighting with honor, that was a prize far more precious. Agreed, Ituralda said, holding out a hand. Althor took it. Go break camp. You'll be in Saldaea by nightfall.
Chapter 11. The Death of Adrin. "I think he should be beaten again," said Larian, moving her fingers in the complex motions of maiden hand talk. "He is like a child, and when a child touches something dangerous, the child is beaten. If a child hurts himself because he was not taught properly to stay away from knives, then the shame is upon his parents." "The previous beating did not seem to do any good," Suriel replied. "He accepted it like a man, not a child, but did not change his actions." "Then we must try again," Larian replied. Avienda dropped her rock into the pile by the watch post, then turned around. She did not acknowledge the maidens who watched the way into the camp, and they did not acknowledge her. Speaking to her while she was being punished would only heighten her shame, and her spear sisters would not do that. She also didn't indicate that she understood their conversation. While nobody expected a former handmaiden to forget hand talk, it was best to be unobtrusive. The hand talk belonged to the maidens. Avienda selected a large stone from the second pile, then began to walk back into camp. If the maidens continued their conversation, she could not tell, as she could no longer see their hands. But their discussion lingered with her. They were angered that Rand al'Thor had gone to meet with the general, Rodel Ituralda, without guards. It was not the first time he had acted so foolishly, and yet he seemed unwilling, or unable, to learn the proper way. Each time he put himself in danger without protection, he insulted the maidens as surely as if he had slapped each one in the face. Avienda probably had some small toe toward her spear sisters. Teaching Rand al'Thor of Aiel ways had been her task, and she had quite obviously failed. Unfortunately, she had a much greater toe toward the wise ones, even if she still didn't know the reason.
Photos from my phone.
Her lesser duty to her spear sisters would have to wait for an appropriate time. Her arms ached from carrying rocks. They were smooth and heavy. She had been required to dig them out of the river beside the manor house. Only her time spent with Elaine, when she had been forced to bathe in water, had given her the strength to walk into that river. In that she had not shamed herself. And at least this river was a small one. Wetlanders might inaccurately call it a stream. A stream was a tiny mountain runoff in which you could dip your hands or fill a water skin. Anything too large to step across was definitely a river. The day was overcast, as usual, and the camp was subdued. Men who had bustled just days before, when the Aiel had arrived, were more lethargic now. The camp wasn't by any means unkempt. Davram Bashir was too careful a commander to allow that, wetlander though he was. However, the men did move more slowly. She'd heard some of them complain that the dark sky was dampening their moods. How strange wetlanders were. What did the weather have to do with one's mood? She could understand being displeased that no raids were approaching, or that a hunt had gone poorly, but because there were clouds in the sky? Was shade so poorly appreciated here? She shook her head, continuing on her way. She had chosen stones which would strain her muscles. To do otherwise would have been to make light of her punishment, and she wouldn't do that, although each step pained her honor. She had to cross through the entire camp in full sight, doing work that was useless. She would rather have been naked before them all outside of the sweat tent. She would rather have run 1,000 laps, or been beaten so hard that she couldn't walk. She reached the side of the manor house and deposited her stone with a hidden sigh of relief. 2 wetlander soldiers from Bashir's army stood guarding the door into the manor, a counterpart to the 2 maidens at the other end of Avienda's trek. As she stooped and picked up a large stone from a second pile by the wall, she overheard them speaking. Burn me, but it's hot, one of the men complained. Hot, the other one replied, glancing at the overcast sky. You're jesting. The first guard waved his hand at himself, puffing out and sweating. How can you not feel that? You must have a fever or something. The first guard shook his head. I just don't like the heat, that's all. Avienda picked up her rock and began to walk back across the green. After some contemplation, she had determined that being a wetlander required one common attribute, a fondness for complaining. During her first months in the wetlands, she had considered this shameful. Did that guard not care that he was losing face in front of his fellow by exposing his weakness? They were all like that, even Elaine. If you listened to her talk about the aches, sicknesses, and frustrations of her pregnancy, you would almost think she was approaching death. However, if complaining was something that Elaine did, then Avienda refused to accept it as a sign of weakness. Her first sister would not act in such a shameful way. Therefore, there had to be some hidden honor in it. Perhaps the wetlanders exposed their weaknesses to their companions as a means of offering friendship and trust. If your friends knew of your weaknesses, it would give them an advantage should you dance the spears with them. Or, perhaps, the complaining was a wetlander way of showing humility, much as the Gaishain showed honor by being subservient. She had asked Elaine about her theories and had received only a fond laugh in return. Was it some aspect of wetlander society that she was forbidden to discuss with outsiders then? Had Elaine laughed because Avienda had figured out something she was not meant to? Either way, it was certainly a way to show honor, and that satisfied Avienda. If only her own problems with the wise ones were as simple. It was expected that the wetlanders would act in erratic, unnatural ways. But what was she to do when wise ones behaved so strangely? She was growing frustrated, not with the wise ones, but with herself. She was strong and brave. Not as brave as some others, of course. She could only wish to be as bold as Elaine. Still, Avienda could think of only a few problems which she hadn't been able to solve with the application of spears, the One Power, or her wits. Yet she had failed utterly at deciphering her current predicament. She reached the other side of the camp and deposited her stone, then brushed off her hands. The maiden stood motionless and contemplative. Avienda moved to the other pile and picked up an oblong rock with a jagged edge. It was 3 handspans wide, and the smooth surface threatened to slip in her fingers. She had to shift it several times before getting a good purchase. She headed back across the trampled winter thatch, past Saldean tents, toward the manor house. Elaine would say that Avienda hadn't thought the problem through. Elaine was calm and thoughtful when other people were tense. Avienda sometimes grew frustrated with how much her first sister liked to talk before committing to action. I need to be more like her. I need to remember that I'm not a maiden of the spear any longer. I can't charge in with weapon held high. She needed to approach problems as Elaine did. That was the only way she was going to get her honor back, and only then could claim Randall Thor and make him hers, as much as he was Elaine's or Min's. She could feel him through the bond. He was in his room, but was not sleeping. He pushed himself hard and slept too little. The stone slipped in her fingers, and she nearly stumbled as she rebalanced her weight, hefting it in tired arms. Some of Bashir's soldiers walked past, bemused expressions on their faces, and Avienda felt herself blush. Although they might not know that she was being punished, she was shamed before them. How would Elaine reason out this situation? The wise ones were angry at Avienda for not learning quickly enough, and yet they didn't teach her. They just asked those questions. Questions about what she thought of their situation, questions about Randall Thor, or about the way Ruark had handled meeting with the Kara Khan. Avienda couldn't help feeling that the questions were tests. Was she answering incorrectly? If so, why didn't they instruct her in the proper responses? The wise ones didn't think she was soft. What was left? What would Elaine say? Avienda wished for her spears back so that she could stab something, attack, test herself against another, work out her anger. No, she thought forcefully. I am going to learn to do this as a wise one. I will find honor again. She reached the manor and dropped her rock. She wiped her brow. Ignoring heat and cold as Elaine had taught her didn't keep her from sweating when she worked her body this hard. Adrin? One door guard asked his companion. Light, you don't look well, truly. Avienda glanced toward the doorway into the manor. The guard who had been complaining about the heat was sagging against the doorway, hand on his forehead. He really didn't look well. Avienda embraced Saidar. She wasn't the best at healing, but perhaps she could... The man reached up suddenly, scratching at the skin of his temples. His eyes rolled up in his head, and his fingers tore gashes in his flesh. Only, instead of blood, the wounds spat out a black, charcoal-like substance. Avienda could feel the intense heat, even from a distance. The other guard gaped in horror as his friend ripped lines of black fire down the sides of his head.
Well.
A blackish tar oozed out, boiling and hissing. The man's clothing burst into flames, and his flesh shriveled from the heat. He didn't utter a sound. Avienda shrugged off her shock, immediately weeding air in a simple pattern to pull the unaffected guard to safety. His friend was now just a pulsing mound of black tar, which in places sprouted blackened bones. There was no skull. The heat was so strong that Avienda had to back away, pulling the guard with her. We're being attacked, the man whispered. Channelers. No, Avienda said. This is something far more evil. Run for help. He seemed too shocked to move, but she shoved him into motion, and he began to move. The tar itself didn't seem to be spreading, which was a blessing, but it had already ignited the doorframe of the manor. It could have the entire building in flames before anyone inside was aware of the danger. Avienda wove air and water, intending to extinguish the flame. However, her weaves frazzled and wavered when they got near the fire. They didn't unweave, but this fire somehow resisted them. She took another step back from the awesome burning intensity. Her brow prickled with sweat, and she had to raise her arm to shade her face from the heat. She could barely make out the black char at the center as it began to glow with the deep red and white of extremely hot coals. Soon, only hints of the black remained. The fire spread across the front wall of the building. Avienda heard screams from inside. Avienda shook herself, then growled and wove earth and air, pulling chunks of the ground up around her. She hurled these at the fire, seeking to smother it. Her weave could not draw the heat out, but that did not stop her from using weaves to cast items into the fire. Chunks of grass-covered earth sizzled and hissed, wan blades flashing to ash before the incredible heat. Avienda continued to work, sweating from both the exertion and the temperature. In the distance, she heard people, perhaps the guard among them, calling for buckets. Buckets? Of course. In the threefold land, water was far too valuable to use in fighting fires. Dirt or sand was used, but here they would use water. Avienda took several steps backward, searching out the curling river that ran beside the manor. She could just barely make out its surface, reflecting the dancing reds and oranges of the flames. Already the entire front of the manor was aflame. She felt channeling from inside, Aes Sedai or wise ones. Hopefully they would escape out of the back of the building. The fire had engulfed the inner hallway, and the rooms off of it had no doors out. Avienda wove a massive column of air and water, pulling a spout of crystalline liquid from the river and drawing it toward her. The column of water undulated in the air like the creature on Rand's banner, a glassy, serpentine dragon that slammed against the flames. Steam hissed outward in an explosion, washing over her. The heat was powerful, and the wave of steam scalded her skin, but she did not back down. She pulled more water, hurling a thick column of it at the darkened mound, which she could only just make out through the steam. That heat was so intense. Avienda stumbled backward a few steps, gritting her teeth, continuing to work. Then there was a sudden explosion as another column of water burst from the river and slammed into the fire. This, along with her own, diverted nearly the entire flow of the river. Avienda blinked. The other column was being directed by weeds she could not see, but she did notice a figure standing in a window up on the second floor, hand forward, face concentrating intensely. Naif, one of Rand's Ashaman. It was said he was particularly strong with air. The fires had retreated. Only the tarry mound remained, radiating a powerful heat. The wall near it and the entryway inside had become a gaping, blackened hole. Avienda continued to pull water and dump it on the charred black mass, though she was beginning to feel extremely tired. Handling so much water required her to channel almost to her capacity. Soon the water stopped hissing. Avienda slacked her flow, then let it dribble to a stop. The ground around her was a wet, blackened disarray that smelled heavily of soggy ash. Bits of wood and char floated in the muddy water, and the holes where she had ripped up earth were filled, making pools. She walked forward hesitantly, inspecting the lump that was the remains of the unfortunate soldier. It was glassy and black, like obsidian, and it sparkled wetly. She picked up a length of singed wood, broken from the wall by the force of her water column, and poked at the mass. It was hard and firm. "Burn you!" a voice bellowed. Avienda looked up. Randall Thor strode through the broken hole that now formed the front of the mansion. He stared at the sky, shaking his fist. "I am the one you want. You will have your war soon enough." "Rand," Avienda said hesitantly. Soldiers were milling about the green, looking concerned, as if expecting a battle. Bewildered servants peeked out of rooms inside the manor. The entire episode with the flames had taken less than 5 minutes. "I will stop you!" Rand roared, causing calls of fright from both servants and soldiers. "Do you hear me? I am coming for you! Don't waste your power! You will need it against me!" "Rand!" Avienda called. He froze, then looked down at her, dazed. She met his eyes, and she could feel his anger, almost as she'd felt the intense flames just a short time before. He turned and stalked away, walking back into the building and up the blackened wooden steps. "Light!" an anxious voice called. "Does this sort of thing happen often when he is near?" Avienda turned to see a young man in an unfamiliar uniform standing and watching. He was lanky, with light brown hair and coppery skin. She didn't remember his name, but she was fairly certain he was one of the officers Rand had brought back after meeting with Rodel Ituralda. She turned back to the mess, listening to soldiers call orders in the distance. Bashir had arrived and was taking command, telling men to watch the perimeter, though he was likely just giving them something to do. This was not the beginning of an attack. It was just another of the Dark One's touches on the world, like meat spoiling, beetles and rats appearing from nothing, and men dropping dead of strange diseases. "Yes," Avienda said in response to the man's question. "It happens often. More often around the Karakarn than in other places, at least. You have had similar events among your own men?" "I have heard stories," he said. "Only I dismissed them." "Not all stories are exaggerations," she said, looking at the blackened remains of the soldier. "The Dark One's prison is weak." "Bloody ashes," the young man said, turning away. "What have you gotten us into, Rodel?" The man shook his head and stalked off. Bashir's officers began calling orders, organizing the men to clean up. Would Rand move out of the manor now? When pockets of evil appeared, people often wanted to leave. And yet, through her bond with Rand, she felt no urgency. In fact, It seemed that he had gone back to rest. That man's moods were becoming as erratic as Elaine's during her pregnancy.
Oh, yeah.
Avienda shook her head and started gathering burned chunks of wood to help clean. As she worked, several Aes Sedai came out of the building and began inspecting the damage. The entire front of the manor was scored with black marks, and the hole where the entryway had been was at least 15 feet across. One of the women, Maurice, eyed Avienda appreciatively. "A shame," she said. Avienda straightened up, lifting a piece of charred wood, her clothing still soaked. With those clouds covering the sun, it would be long before she was dry. "A shame?" she asked. "About the manor?" The portly Lord Talayan, owner of the place, moaned to himself as he sat on a stool inside the entryway, wiping his brow and shaking his head. "No," Maurice said. "A shame about you, child. Your skill with weaves, it is impressive. If we had you in the White Tower, you'd have been an Aes Sedai by now. Your weaving, it has some roughness to it, but you'd learn to fix that quickly if taught by sisters." There was an audible sniff, and Avienda spun. Mylene stood behind her. The golden-haired wise one had her arms folded beneath her breasts, and her stomach was starting to bulge with child. Her face was not amused. How had Avienda let the woman walk up behind her without hearing? She was letting her fatigue make her careless. Mylene and Maurice stared at each other for a long moment. Then the tall Aes Sedai spun in a flurry of green skirts and moved off to speak with the servants who had been trapped by the flames, asking if any of them needed healing. Mylene watched her go, then shook her head. "Insufferable woman," she muttered. "To think how we once regarded them." "Wise one?" Avienda asked. "I'm stronger than most Aes Sedai, Avienda, and you're far stronger than I am. You have a control and understanding of weaves that puts most of us to shame. Others have to struggle to learn what comes naturally to you. Roughness to your weaves," she says. "I doubt any of the Aes Sedai, save perhaps Cadsuane Sedai, could have managed what you did with that column of water. Moving water that far required you to use the river's own flow and pressure." "Is that what I did?" Avienda asked, blinking. Mylene eyed her, then snorted again softly to herself. "Yes, that is what you did. You have such great talent, child." Avienda swelled with praise. From wise ones, it was rare, but always sincere. "But you refuse to learn," Mylene continued. "There isn't much time. Here, I have another question for you. What do you think of Rand al'Thor's plan to kidnap these Domani merchant chiefs?" Avienda blinked again, so tired it was hard to think. It defied reason that the Domani used merchants as leaders in the first place. How could a merchant lead people? Did not merchants have to focus on their wares? It was ridiculous. Would the Wetlanders ever stop shocking her with their strange ways? And why was Mylene asking her about this now of all times? "His plan seems a good one, wise one," Avienda said. "Yet the spears do not like being used for kidnapping. I think the Karakarn should have spoken in terms of offering protection, forced protection for the merchants. The chiefs would have responded better to being told they were protecting rather than kidnapping. They would be doing the very same thing, no matter what you call it." "But what you call a thing is important," Avienda said. "It is not dishonest if both definitions are true." Mylene's eyes twinkled, and Avienda caught a hint of a smile on her lips. "What else do you think of the meeting?" "Rand al'Thor still seems to think that the Karakarn can make demands like a Wetlander king. This is my shame. I failed to explain the right way." Mylene waved a hand. "You have no shame there. We all know how bull-headed the Karakarn is. The wise ones have tried as well, and none have been able to train him correctly." "So, that wasn't the reason for her dishonor before the wise ones. What was it then?" Avienda ground her teeth in frustration, then forced herself to continue. Regardless, he needs to be reminded, again and again. Ruark is a wise and patient man, but not all clan chiefs are so. I know that some of the others wonder if their decision to follow Randall Thor was an error. True, Mylane said. But look at what happened to the Shido. I did not say they were right, wise one, Avienda said. A group of soldiers were hesitantly trying to pry up the glassy black mound. It appeared to have fused to the ground. Avienda lowered her voice. They are wrong to question the Kara Khan, but they are speaking to one another. Randall Thor needs to realize that they will not accept offense after offense from him without end. They may not turn against him like the Shido, but I would not put it past Timolan, for instance, to simply return to the Threefold Land and leave the Kara Khan to his arrogance. Mylane nodded. Do not worry. We are aware of this possibility. That meant wise ones had been sent to soothe Timolan, who was chief of the Miagoma Aiel. It would not be the first time. Did Randall Thor know how hard the wise ones worked behind his back to maintain Aiel loyalty? Probably not. He saw them all as one homogeneous group, sworn to him to be used. That was one of Rand's great weaknesses. He could not see that Aiel, like other people, did not like being used as tools. The clans were far less tightly knit than he believed. Blood feuds had been put aside for him. Couldn't he understand how incredible that was? Couldn't he see how tenuous that alliance continued to be? But not only was he a wetlander by birth, he was not a wise one. Few Aiel themselves saw the work the wise ones did in a dozen different areas. How simple life had seemed when she had been a maiden. It would have dazzled her to know how much went on beyond her sight. Mylane stared blindly at the broken building. A remnant of a remnant, she said as if to herself. And if he leaves us burned and broken like those boards, what will become of the Aiel then? Do we limp back to the Threefold Land and continue as we did before? Many will not want to leave. These lands offer too much. Avienda blinked at the weight of those words. She had rarely given thought to what would happen after the Kara Khan was finished with them. She was centered on the now, upon regaining her honor and being there to protect Randall Thor at the last battle. But a wise one could not just think of the now or the tomorrow. She had to think of the years ahead and the times that would be brought upon the winds. A remnant of a remnant. He had broken the Aiel as a people. What would become of them?
Oh, my light's going dead.
Mylane glanced back at Avienda, her face softening. Go to the tents, child, and rest. You look like a Sharadan that has crawled on his belly across 3 days of sand. Avienda looked down at her arms, seeing the flakes of ash from the burnings. Her clothing was soaked and stained, and she suspected that her face was just as filthy. Her arms ached from carrying the stones all day. Once she acknowledged the fatigue, it seemed to crash upon her like a windstorm. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to remain upright. She would not shame herself by collapsing, but she did turn to leave, as instructed. Oh, and Avienda, Mylane called. We will discuss your punishment tomorrow. She turned in shock. For not finishing with the stones, Mylane said, surveying the wreckage again. And for not learning quickly enough. Go. Avienda sighed. Another round of questions, and another undeserved punishment. There was a correlation of some sort, but what? She was too exhausted to think about it for now. All she wanted was her bed, and she found herself treacherously recalling the soft, luxurious mattresses back in the palace of Camelin. She forced those thoughts out of her mind. Sleep that soundly, muffled in pillows and down comforters, and you'd be too relaxed to wake if someone tried to kill you in the night. How had she let Elaine convince her to sleep in one of those soft, feathered death traps? Another thought occurred to her as she pushed that one away. A treacherous one. A thought of Randall Thor, resting in his room. She could go to him. No, not until she had her honor back. She would not go to him as a beggar. She would go to him as a woman of honor, assuming that she could ever figure out what she was doing wrong. She shook her head and trotted toward the Aiel camp at the side of the green. Chapter 12. Unexpected Encounters. Egwene walked the cavernous halls of the White Tower, lost in thought. Her two red keepers trailed along behind. They seemed a little sullen these days. Elida ordered them to stay with Egwene more and more often. Though the individuals changed, there were almost always two with her. And yet it seemed that they could sense that Egwene considered them to be attendants rather than guards. It had been well over a month since Swan had conveyed her disturbing news in Tel'aran'rhiod, Riyadh, but still Egwene thought about it. The events were a reminder that the world was coming apart.
Right.
This was a time when the White Tower should have been a source of stability. Instead, it divided against itself, while Randall Thor's men bonded sisters. How could Rand have allowed such a thing? There was obviously little left of the youth with whom she'd grown up. Of course, there was little of the youthful Egwene left, either. Gone were the days when the two of them had seemed destined to end up married, living on a little farm in the Two Rivers. That, oddly, led her to thinking of Gawain. How long had it been since she'd last seen him, stealing kisses in Cairhien? Where was he now? Was he safe? Keep focused, she told herself. Clean the patch of floor you're working on first before you move on to the rest of the house. Gawain could look after himself. He'd done a competent job of that in the past. Too competent in some cases. Swan and the others would deal with the Ashaman matter. The other news was far more disturbing. One of the Forsaken in the camp? A woman, yet channeling Saidin instead of Saidar? Egwene would have called it impossible once, yet she had seen ghosts in the halls of the White Tower, and the corridors seemed to rearrange on a daily basis. This was just another sign. She shivered. Halima had touched Egwene, supposedly massaging her headaches away. Those headaches disappeared as soon as Egwene had been captured. Why hadn't she considered that Halima might have been causing them? What else had the woman been plotting? What hidden knots would the Aes Sedai stumble over? What traps had she laid? One section of the floor at a time. Clean what you could reach, then move on. Swan and the others would have to deal with Halima's plots, too. Egwene's backside hurt, but the pain was growing increasingly irrelevant to her. Sometimes she laughed when beaten, sometimes not. The strap was unimportant. The greater pain, what had been done to Tarvalin, was far more demanding. She nodded to a group of white-clothed novices as they passed her in the hallway, and they bobbed down in curtsies. Egwene frowned, but didn't chastise them. She just hoped that they wouldn't draw penances from the trailing reds for showing deference to Egwene. Her goal was the quarters of the Brown Aja, the section that was now down in the wing. Maidani had taken her time volunteering to train Egwene today. The command had finally come today, weeks after the first dinner with Elida. Oddly, however, Benai Nalsad had also offered to give her instruction this day. Egwene hadn't spoken to the Shienaran Brown since that first conversation some weeks before. She'd never repeated lessons with the same woman twice, and yet the name had been given to her in the morning as the first of the day's visits. When she reached the east wing, which now held the brown sector of the tower, her red minders reluctantly took up positions in the hallway outside, waiting for her return. Elida probably would have liked them to stay with Egwene, but after the Reds themselves had been so exacting in protecting their boundary, there was little chance of another Aja, even the mild Browns, letting a pair of Red sisters infiltrate their quarters. Egwene hurried her pace as she entered the section with brown tiled floors, passing bustling women in nondescript, muted dresses. It was going to be a full day, with her appointments with sisters, her scheduled beatings, and her regular novice load of scrubbing floors or other chores. She arrived at Ben I's door, but hesitated there. Most sisters agreed to train Egwene only when forced into the duty, and the experience was often unpleasant. Some of Egwene's teachers disliked her because of her affiliation with the rebels. Others were annoyed by how easily she could craft weaves, and still others were infuriated to find that she would not show them respect, like a novice. These lessons, however, had been among Egwene's best chances to sow seeds against Elida. She'd planted one of those during her first visit with Ben I. Had it begun to sprout? Egwene knocked, and then entered at the call to come in. The sitting room inside was cluttered with the refuse of scholarship. Stacks and stacks of books, like miniature city towers, leaned against one another. Skeletons of various creatures were mounted in various states of construction. The woman owned enough bones to populate a menagerie. Egwene shivered when she noticed a full human skeleton in the corner, held
I'm not
upright
sure how much
and
battery I
bound
have on my
together with
tablet.
thread.
Let's see.
Some detailed notations written directly on the bones in
Tablet's
black ink.
doing good.
There was barely room to walk, and only one clear place to sit. Ben I's own stuffed chair, the armrests worn with a twin set of depressions, doubtless where the Browns' arms had rested during countless late-night reading sessions. The ceiling felt lower for the several mummified fowl and astronomical contraptions which hung above. Egwene had to duck her head beneath a model of the sun in order to reach the place where Ben I stood rifling through a stack of leather-bound volumes. "Ah," she said as she noticed Egwene. "Good." Slender in a bony sort of way, she had dark hair that was streaked with gray from age. The hair was in a bun, and she, like many Browns, wore a simple dress that hadn't been fashionable for a century or two. Ben I moved over to her stuffed sitting chair, ignoring the cipher chairs by the hearth. Both of those had accumulated stacks of papers since Egwene's previous visit. Egwene cleared off a stool, placing the dusty skeleton of a rat on the floor between two stacks of books about the reign of Arthur Hawkwing. "Well, I suppose we should get on with your instruction then," Ben I said, settling back in her chair. Egwene kept her face calm. Had Ben I requested an opportunity to train Egwene again? Or had she been forced into it? Egwene could see an unsophisticated brown sister getting repeatedly roped into a duty that nobody else wanted. At Ben I's request, Egwene performed a number of weaves, work far beyond the skill of most novices, but easy for Egwene, even with her power dampened by forkroot. She tried to tease out the Browns' feelings on the relocation of her quarters, but Ben I, like most of the Browns Egwene had spoken to, preferred to avoid that topic. Egwene did some more weaves. After a time, she wondered just what the point of the meeting was. Hadn't Ben I asked her to demonstrate most of these very same weaves during her previous visit? "Very well," Ben I said, getting herself a cup of tea from a pot warming on a small coal brazier. She didn't offer any tea to Egwene. "You are skilled enough at that. But I wonder, do you have the sharpness of mind, the ability to deal with difficult situations that an Aes Sedai is required to have?" Egwene said nothing, though she did pointedly pour herself some tea. Ben I did not object. "Let's see," Ben I mused. "Suppose that you were in a situation where you were in conflict with some members of your own Aja. You have happened upon information you weren't supposed to know, and your Aja's leaders are quite upset with you. Suddenly you find yourself being sentenced to some most unpleasant duties, as if they are trying to sweep you under the rug and forget about you. Tell me, in this situation, how would you react?" Egwene almost choked on her tea. The Brown wasn't very supple. She had begun asking about the 13th depository, had she? And that had landed her in trouble? You were supposed to know about the secret histories that Egwene had mentioned so casually during her previous visit here. Well, Egwene said, sipping her tea, let me approach it with a clear mind. Best to view it from the perspective of the Aja's leaders, I should think. Then I frowned faintly. I suppose. Now, in the situation you describe, can we assume that these secrets have been entrusted to the Aja for safekeeping? Ah, good. Well, from their perspective, important and careful plans have been upset. Think of how it must look. Someone has learned secrets they should not. That whispers of a disturbing leak somewhere among your most trusted members. Then I paled. I suppose I could see that. Then the best way to handle the situation would be twofold, Egwene said, taking another sip of tea. It tasted terrible. First, the leaders of the Aja would have to be reassured. They need to know that it wasn't their fault that the information leaked. If I were the hypothetical sister in trouble, and if I'd done nothing wrong, I'd go to them and explain. That way they could stop searching for the one who let information slip. But, Ben said, that probably won't help the sister, the hypothetical one in trouble, get out of her punishment. It couldn't hurt, Egwene said. Likely she's being punished to keep her out of the way while the Aja leaders search for a traitor. When they know there isn't one, they'll be more likely to look at the fallen sister's situation with empathy, particularly after she's offered them a solution. Solution? Ben asked. Her teacup sat in her fingers as if forgotten. And which solution would you offer? The best one. Competence. Obviously, some people among the Aja know these secrets. Well, if this sister were to prove her trustworthiness and her capability, perhaps the leaders of her Aja would realize the best place for her is as one of the caretakers of the secrets. An easy solution, if you consider it. Then I sat thoughtfully, a small mummified finch spinning slowly on its cord directly above her. Yes, but will it work?
I'll be right back.
It is certainly better than serving in some forgotten storeroom cataloging scrolls, Egwene said. Unjust punishment sometimes cannot be avoided, but it is best never to let others forget that it is unjust. If she simply accepts the way people treat her, then it won't be long before they assume she deserves the position they've placed her in. And thank you, Sylviana, for that little bit of advice. Yes, Ben said, nodding. Yes, I do suppose that you are correct. I'm always willing to help, Egwene said in a softer voice, turning back to her tea. In, of course, hypothetical situations. For a moment, Egwene worried that she'd gone too far in calling the Brown by her name. However, Ben met her eyes, then actually went so far as to bow her head just slightly in thanks. If the hours spent with Ben had been isolated, Egwene would still have found it remarkable. However, she was shocked to discover, upon leaving Ben-I's lair of a room, a novice waiting with a message instructing her to attend Nagora, a white sister. Egwene still had time before her meeting with Maidani, so she went. She couldn't ignore a summons from a sister, though she would undoubtedly have to do extra chores later to make up for skipping the floor scrubbing. At the meeting with Nagora, Egwene found herself being trained in logic, and the logical puzzles presented sounded very similar to a request for help in dealing with a warder who was growing frustrated with his increasing age and inability to fight. Egwene gave what help she could, which Nagora declared to be logic without flaw, before releasing her. After that, there was another message, this one from Suana, one of the sitters of the Yellow Aja. A sitter? It was the first time Egwene had been ordered to attend one of them. Egwene hurried to the appointment and was admitted by a maidservant. Suana's quarters looked more like a garden than proper rooms. As a sitter, Suana could demand quarters with windows, and she made full use of her inset balcony as an herb garden. But beyond that, She had mirrors positioned to reflect light into the room, which was overgrown with small
clogged
potted
in.
trees,
I hate
shrubs
this
growing
thing
in
keeps getting
large
clogged
basins
up.
of earth, and even a small garden for carrots and radishes. Egwene noticed with displeasure
There we
a
go.
small pile of rotted tubers in one container, likely just harvested but somehow already spoiled. The room smelled strongly of basil, thyme, and a dozen other herbs. Despite the problems in the tower, despite the rotted plants, she was buoyed by the scent of life in the room, the freshly turned earth and growing plants. And Nynaeve complained that the sisters in the White Tower ignored the usefulness of herbs. If only she could spend some time with plump, round-faced Suana. Egwene found the woman remarkably pleasant. Suana ran her through a series of weaves, many of them related to healing, where Egwene had never particularly shone. Still, her skill must have impressed the sitter, for midway through the lesson, Egwene seated on a cushioned stool between two potted trees, Suana sitting more properly in a stiff, leather-covered chair, the tone of the conversation changed. We should...
Alright, everyone, I'm gonna call Into This Life for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. It's probably back to the other way I've been doing them just because I like that one better. But until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.